Hey, I'm Shiloh with D20 Academy, and welcome back to me being a couple weeks late with this video. Sorry about that. But to make up for it, I got a cool new audio setup, so yay for that. This is part 5 of D20 Academy's complete comprehensive guide to Fantasy Flight Games' Star Wars role-playing game. Yeah, it's a lot, I know. Well, in part 1, we talked about the dice system and an overview of the mechanics. Part 2, we talked character creation. Part 3, gear and equipment. Part 4, conflict and combat. And now it's part 5, where we're talking starships and vehicles. And so if you haven't listened to the past few episodes, go listen to those. Otherwise, everything we talk about today is not going to make much sense. Hey, this Star Wars system is really cool, right? Well, if you want to see it in action, check out our podcast, D20 Academy. Not only do we have really cool podcast episodes and all kinds of things, we are currently doing an actual play series using this Star Wars system called Friends Like These. It's a lot of fun. We're wrapping it up now, nearly done with it. So go ahead and check that out. It's a lot of fun. Okay, let's kick things off talking about vehicle characteristics. So, all the vehicles in the Star Wars universe, whether they're like hover cars, speeder bikes, freighters, or Death Stars, all follow the same kind of rules and all have the same characteristics. So let's cover those now. Starting off with handling. Handling is the ship's agility and how smooth it is to pilot it. Next up we have speed, which is the vehicle's maximum speed, how fast it can go. Then silhouette, which is a numerical value that represents the vehicle's size and mass. Then defense, which is the vehicle's first line of defense, typically shields of some sort. And this works a lot like how defense works on a personal scale. Then we have armor, which is the armor of the vehicle, and this works a lot like how soak works on a personal scale. Then hull trauma threshold, which is how sturdy and hardy the vehicle is, and this is kind of the equivalent of a wound threshold on a personal scale. And then system strain threshold, which is how much strain the ship can take, and this is the equivalent of the strain threshold on the personal scale. Finally, we have customization hardpoints, which are the amount of upgrade slots on the vehicle. Okay, so let's jump into handling. Once again, handling is how easy it is to control the vehicle, right? How smooth it is to turn, how agile it is, doing U-turns, pulling drifts, things like that. And this is some kind of numerical value. It could be a positive number or a negative number. And obviously, different ships have different handling. It's much easier to pilot a TIE fighter, right, to make that turn around corners and do U-turns and do flips and stuff, than it is to do the same things with a Star Destroyer. Whenever a pilot makes a piloting check with this vehicle, they add dice depending on the ship's handling. If the ship's handling is a positive value, they add that amount of boost dice. But if it is a negative value, they add that amount of setback dice. Alright, let's talk speed. So speed is how fast a vehicle is currently going, right? 0 being stationary, 1 being slow, and the very highest 5 being super speedy, extra fast. And your vehicle's speed will be fluctuating over the course of the battle or the chase or whatever you're participating in as you increase speed, decrease speed, all that kind of stuff. And this affects other things you can do. So the faster you're going, the harder it is to make turns or avoid asteroids. But the slower you're going, the easier you are to hit. Things like that that are written in the rules later. Keep in mind that you can never go above a ship's maximum speed, which is written on the ship's stat block, unless you have some sort of talent or ability that allows you to go above the ship's regular maximum speed. So silhouette is, like I mentioned, kind of the abstract representation of an object's size or mass. And silhouette is not just used for ships, it's used for everything in this game. So silhouette 0 is anything smaller than like your average adult human, like a Jawa or an astromech droid. Silhouette 1 is kind of your average adult humanoid. Silhouette 3 to 4 are kind of like starfighters and freighters, and the highest silhouette 10 is something as big as a Death Star. A ship silhouette affects a couple different things, but most notably it has to do with combat. Obviously, bigger ships have a harder time hitting really small ships, and small ships have a really easy time hitting big ships. Alright, before we continue, I want to take a quick moment to talk about the various scales used in the game. So there are 2 different scales used in the game: personal scale and planetary scale. Personal scale is, on the ground, between people, right? Like in a regular battle. But planetary scale is used when vehicles and ships are fighting each other. And these scales translate to each other with a 10-to-1 ratio. So 10 points of damage on a personal scale is equal to 1 point of damage on a planetary scale, and vice versa. In the same way, 10 points of soak is equal to 1 point of armor, and vice versa. Alright, so hull trauma and system strain is identical to wounds and strain on the personal scale. So once a ship's hull trauma exceeds its hull trauma threshold, it is the equivalent of it, getting knocked out or getting destroyed, just like in a battle when a character's wounds exceed their wound threshold. And the same is with strain and system strain. The difference is, in planetary combat and ships and stuff, it's much harder to recover hull trauma and system strain than it is to recover things like wounds and strain. So let's talk defense. Just like on a personal scale, defense works very similar. So when you are targeted with an attack, the attacker adds setback dice equal to your defense to the attack roll, right? Just like on a personal scale. The only difference with vehicles is that vehicles have defense in 4 different zones. Anything silhouette 4 or less only has 2 defense zones, forward and aft, the front half of the ship and the back half of the ship. But ships with silhouette 5 or higher have 4, forward, aft, port, and starboard, which is the front of the ship, the back of the ship, the left side of the ship, and the right side of the ship. So in vehicle combat, the attacker rolls appropriate defense depending on what side of the ship they are attacking. So if you are being chased by a ship, they can only target the back of your ship. So they have to roll against your ship's aft defense. Keep in mind that characters can actually reroute defense from different zones to other zones using special vehicle actions, which we'll cover later. Defense may also be bolstered with other actions or maneuvers or talents and stuff like that. But keep in mind that a zone's defense can never exceed 4. Alright, so let's jump into space combat. Now, space combat works a lot like normal combat when it comes to initiative. So every character in the battle rolls initiative, cool, or vigilance, depending on the circumstances. And then they create those slots, and then every round, you fill in those slots. Or if you're using the alternate rolls that we use, whatever initiative you roll, that is your place in the initiative. This is what we talked about in the last episode, so go check that out if you kind of forget how initiative works in this system. However, now on your turn, it's much harder to, shoot your opponent because they're in a totally different ship, dozens of feet away from you, hundreds in some cases. So instead of using your guns and swords and stuff like that, instead you now have access to all kinds of new vehicle actions and maneuvers. Some are pilot-only maneuvers or actions, meaning only the pilot can take those. That's things like increasing, decreasing speed, flying, taking evasive maneuvers, things like that. The list of these maneuvers are on these pages of the core rulebooks, listed down below me here. Characters other than the pilot can also take a ton of cool actions on their turns. Things like co-piloting, slicing enemy systems, firing the ship's weapons, sending spoof missiles, all that kind of stuff, and those cool actions are listed on these pages of the core rulebooks. Attacking is the same as on a personal scale, except that you can only fire with the ship's weapons, and each weapon can only be fired once per round. Each weapon also has a firing arc, which is, you have to make sure that the target is within the firing arc. For example, X-Wings can only shoot forward. Their guns are stationary, built onto the wings. They can only fire forward, whereas the guns in the Millennium Falcon can twist and turn and shoot anywhere. So make sure that the target is within the ship's weapon's firing arc. The difficulty of the attack is no longer determined by the range, but instead by the difference in silhouettes, right? It's much easier for an X-Wing to hit a Star Destroyer than for a Star Destroyer to hit an X-Wing. Speaking of range, the range bands are much different and cover much wider areas, right, than in a personal scale. However, most weapons only have a range of close, and so most battles will take place within this range. Also, keep in mind that while advantages can still be spent on critical hits and activating weapon qualities as normal, there are now new tables on spending advantages, threats, triumphs, and despairs on a planetary scale, and those tables are listed here on these pages of the core rulebooks. And obviously there is a new crit table, except now for critical hits instead of critical injuries, because ships are actually more prone to getting, broken hyperdrives or smoking engines than, broken bones or brain injuries, because they're vehicles, so they don't really have those things. And this table for these critical hits is listed on this page of the core rulebooks right here. You might notice that 2 of these critical hits target a ship's particular component, whether it's the hyperdrive or the engines or the shields or whatever it is. And in this case, there is also a table of the various lists of components on small ships and big ships and what happens when those components are hit with this critical hit. So say one ship is attacking another and they roll a critical hit, and the critical hit they roll is that one of the ones that, allows them to target a specific component. They choose which component they want to target, and then these tables, listed here on the core rulebooks, will tell you what happens to the enemy ship depending on which component was hit. Let's talk stellar phenomenon and terrain. Obviously, when you are flying and, in an epic space chase or battle or whatever, there's all kinds of obstacles and things in the way. Asteroids, comets, black holes, debris, stuff like that. Whenever a pilot performs some sort of maneuver while in this difficult terrain, they have to make a successful pilot check. The difficulty is equal to the vehicle's current speed or half its silhouette, whichever is higher, and then the lower number upgrades the difficulty by that amount. On a failure, it doesn't mean that the ship runs into an asteroid and blows up, though maybe you can spend despairs like that. But usually, failing this kind of roll just means that you drop to speed 1 and you don't complete whatever kind of maneuver you are trying. Okay, finally we have attachments and modifications. Just like with equipment, you can modify your ships with really cool things like increased armor, new guns, all that kind of stuff. Adding attachments to vehicles works just the same as adding attachments on equipment. Attachments have a certain number of hard points they take up, and you can only have an amount on your ship equal to the ship's maximum hard points. And of course, each attachment has a number of modification options, which you can try to install. The only difference is installing a mod on a vehicle attachment costs 10 times the amount of credits it would normally cost for installing a mod on some kind of equipment. Okay, that brings us to the end of this episode. I know this one was pretty quick, but yeah, spaceship combat and chases, all that kind of stuff is really cool. It's a really fun part of the system. I'm excited for you guys to try it out. Let me know below if you have any questions or comments or things that you're still confused about. I'd love to be able to help you out there. Please remember, friends like these, we're playing through this system. If you want to see this, in fact, space combat system in play, we do use it in that actual play series. So if you want to check that out, go ahead. Friends like these, it's on our podcast, D20 Academy. Hey, if you want to keep up to date with what we're doing here in the Academy, follow us on Instagram at D20_Academy. And if you want to hop into our Discord, you can comment on one of our Instagram posts, comment down below. We'll let you in. And on our Discord, we have all kinds of interesting conversations on the episodes, on these YouTube videos, answer any questions you guys have about storytelling, role-playing, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes we just have fun discussions. And yeah, if you are a game master looking to build your own campaign, maybe even within this cool Star Wars system, head over to d20academy.com. I have a free video for you there to take you through the entire process. But until next time, next episode, we're talking about the Force in this system. It's going to be a lot of fun. Until then, may the Force be with you.